51 from the SAT 17 April 2019 QAS test. Let's jump in. So 51 says the authors of both passages characterize the impact hypothesis as something. So here we need to figure out basically what do each of the authors of the passages, how do they characterize, wow, this is bothering me. Cannot have a square. Yeah, better. Okay, so how are they characterizing the impact hypothesis? What do either of these authors think about the impact hypothesis? So this question, like 50, if you watched the last video, is one of those more general answers or questions about the paired passages. And the only way really to solve these is to have a general understanding of what the main claim of either passage is, which is why it's very important when you do these passages, make sure you understand what the argument is. If nothing else, just try to ask yourself, what's the argument for one, what's the argument for two, what's the relationship between them? Make sure you have that in your head, because that's really the only way that you're going to be able to answer these questions effectively, because you're not going to be able to look for specific text like you will on other passages. So how do both authors characterize the impact hypothesis? Let's remember basically the claims of either passage. Passage 1 is in favor of the impact hypothesis. It thinks that it's good. It thinks that it explains things very well. It thinks that there's evidence to support it. All is good. Passage 2 basically thinks the opposite, that there is not good evidence for the impact hypothesis, etc., that it's wrong for a number of reasons, all that. So let's try to find an answer choice that will match that. So the authors of both passages characterize the impact hypothesis as A, unsupported by reliable evidence. I don't think this is very good or very plausible, because I don't think that the author of passage 1 would say that the impact hypothesis is unsupported by reliable evidence, because he's in favor of that. So for this one, I would get rid of A, because this may be something true of passage 2, but not of passage 1. B says that the impact hypothesis is interesting but difficult to conclusively evaluate. So this might seem plausible because it's a little more general. It's not making too strong a claim. Here's the issue with this, is sort of the attitude and the tone of this answer choice is that, yes, the impact hypothesis it's interesting. It makes sense. It could be true, but we just don't know if we can conclusively evaluate it, which is not really the right attitude that the author of passage 2 has towards the impact hypothesis. He's a little more explicitly negative towards it and not really making the claim that, wow, this is an interesting theory, it's a cool theory, I like this theory, but we just don't know for sure. That's not the right attitude. And even if just that attitudinal approach may seem a little unclear, it may seem a little uncertain, that's enough for me to at least put this on the back burner for now and not look too closely at it. So C says that both passages, or both authors, think that the impact hypothesis is more appealing to the public than to specialists. And this sort of rings some bells for me, because if you remember from passage 2, they do talk about this here, right? There's this whole paragraph where Meltzer is basically talking about how the impact hypothesis is compelling because it kind of has this Hollywood appeal. It's a simple explanation. It's a dramatic explanation. So that's cool. The only issue, though, is that passage 1 doesn't really say that it's more appealing to the public than the specialists. It doesn't really say anything about it. And this seems to be kind of a negative stance towards the impact hypothesis if only the public like it as opposed to specialists. So I don't think the author of passage 1 would agree with this, and there's really no evidence about it. So I would get rid of C for sure. Then we have D, which says that the hypothesis is controversial in the scientific community. I don't see any reason to get rid of it right off the bat. It seems like there may have been evidence in either passage that supports this, although I don't remember for sure. But nothing outright strikes me about it as being wrong. So let's go back and see if we find evidence to support it, that it's controversial in the scientific community. So if we scan through passage 1, I think this right here is good enough evidence. Not all will be convinced, right? So not every scientist is convinced by the impact hypothesis, so there's a little level of controversy about whether or not it's true. I think that's good enough for that. And then in passage 2, let's look for evidence that it's controversial. There's a lot of it because it takes a negative approach, but I think maybe right here. Those claims were sharply contested by some specialists in the relevant fields, however. So both of these passages tell us that the claim is controversial in the scientific community, and all these other answer choices don't really match up. So for that reason, I'm going to choose answer choice D as our correct answer for question 51.